in the suffocating darkness of a narrow limestone cave. The silence is broken only by the sound of water dripping against the stone and the ragged, terrified breathing of men hiding in the shadows. But above them, the ceiling vibrates. Thud, thud, thud. It is the mechanical thunder of Roman hobnailed boots marching on the surface, hunting for targets. It is 132 CE, and the Roman Empire stands at the absolute zenith of its power, stretching from the mists of Britain to the sands of Iraq. Yet, in this small rocky province, a rebellion erupts with such ferocity that it shatters the empire's confidence. When Emperor Hadrian finally writes to the Senate to announce the end of hostilities, he deliberately omits the standard opening phrase, "I and the legions are well," because they were not. Historians believe an entire Roman legion, or the 22nd Deiotarana, may have marched into these hills and was wiped from the pages of history forever. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we uncover the Bar Kokhba Revolt, the cataclysmic war that forced Rome to mobilize 1/3 of its entire military capacity, and ended with the erasure of Judea from the map. In the year 130 CE, Emperor Hadrian arrived in the province of Judea, not merely as a ruler, but as a visionary builder. To the Roman mind, Hadrian was the embodiment of the Pax Romana. He was an intellectual, a lover of Greek culture, and a man who believed that Roman order was a gift to a chaotic world. He looked upon the ruins of Jerusalem, which had been razed by Titus 60 years earlier, and decided to bestow upon it the greatest honor an emperor could give. He would rebuild it. But he did not intend to restore Jerusalem. He planned to construct Aelia Capitolina, a model pagan metropolis named after his own clan, the Aelius, and the chief god of Rome, Jupiter Capitolinus. To the legions and the Roman administrators, this was progress. They envisioned colonnaded streets, bathhouses, and theaters rising from the rubble, bringing civilization to a dusty frontier. But to the Jewish population watching from the shadows of the limestone hills, this was not construction. It was spiritual annihilation. The ultimate blasphemy occurred when Hadrian ordered the construction of a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount, the precise location of the destroyed Holy of Holies. Day after day, the sharp, rhythmic clink, clink, clink of Roman chisels carving the visage of a pagan idol into the sacred stones of the mountain echoed through the valley, sounding to the locals less like industry and more like a declaration of war against God. The cultural collision deepened with new imperial decrees. Historians believe that around this time, Hadrian issued a strictly enforced ban on genital mutilation, which he viewed as a barbaric practice incompatible with the refined aesthetics of the Greco-Roman body. To the Romans, banning circumcision was a humanist measure to end savagery. To the Jews, forbidding the Brit Milah was a decree of death against their eternal covenant with the Almighty. It was an existential threat that could not be negotiated away with silver or diplomacy. The atmosphere in the province grew heavy with unspoken rage. The priests and scholars realized that Rome did not just demand their taxes, Rome demanded their soul. Yet, the surface remained calm. When Hadrian concluded his tour and sailed west toward Greece, he believed the province was pacified, modernized, and secure. Hadrian left Judea thinking he had brought order. He had no idea he had just lit a fuse that would explode the moment his ship disappeared over the horizon. Into the vacuum of despair left by the destruction of the Second Temple, a man stepped forward who did not merely ask for loyalty. He demanded absolute submission. His name was Simon Bar Kokhba. To the Roman governors, he was a bandit chief, a nuisance to be swatted away by local auxiliaries. But to the Judean populace, starving for hope, he became something far more dangerous, a Messiah. And the turning point came when Rabbi Akiva, the most respected sage of the era, looked upon this warrior and applied the prophecy of Numbers 24:17. A star shall come out of Jacob. With that endorsement, Simon Bar Kokhba became Simon Bar Kokhba, the son of a star. The rebellion was no longer a political uprising. It was a cosmic event, a holy war ordained by God to restore the kingdom of Israel. The evidence of this new state was not written on parchment, but struck in silver. In the hidden forges of the Judean hills, the air rang with the rhythmic, metallic clink of hammers smashing down on Roman denarii. The rebels took the currency of the empire, coins bearing the profile of Emperor Hadrian, and violently filed off the face of the oppressor. Over the erased image of Caesar, they stamped their own symbols: a lyre, a palm branch, or the facade of the temple they vowed to rebuild. Encircling these images was a bold declaration in ancient Hebrew script: Year 1 of the redemption of Israel. But redemption required blood. Bar Kokba was a commander of terrifying discipline. Later legends claimed he tested the loyalty of his prospective soldiers by ordering them to cut off one of their own fingers, a myth that reflects the brutal aura he projected. Recovered letters from the desert caves reveal a leader who micromanaged his officers with threats of punishment and fetters if they failed to deliver grain or comfort to his troops. He forged an army not just of believers, but of hardened warriors who feared their commander almost as much as they feared God. He had the people, the faith, and the will of a prophet. But Bar Kokhba was also a pragmatist who understood the mathematics of war. He knew that faith alone does not stop a Roman gladius, and that meeting the legions in open battle would be suicide. He needed a new way to fight. The war that erupted in 132 CE was unlike anything the Roman legions had trained for. In Gaul or Carthage, Rome fought on open plains where the rigid discipline of the maniple and the crushing weight of cavalry were decisive. But Judea was a nightmare of vertical geography. The landscape was a broken spine of limestone ridges and deep, dry wadis, where a heavy infantry column was not a weapon, but a slow-moving target. For years before the first arrow flew, Bar Kokhba's followers had been silently hollowing out the earth beneath the Romans' feet, and they expanded natural limestone fissures into vast subterranean complexes, connected by narrow crawl spaces that forced any pursuing legionary to discard his scutum and armor just to squeeze through. It was a fortress that could not be besieged because it was invisible from the surface. The tactical reality was brutal. A Roman patrol would be marching through a sun-baked ravine, the only sound the grinding of hobnailed boots on loose scree and the wind whistling through the dry scrub. Suddenly, that silence would shatter. Massive boulders crashed down from the ridgelines, crushing the disciplined files into chaos. Before the centurions could rally their men into a testudo, Jewish fighters would erupt from hidden trapdoors in the ground, strike with daggers and captured swords, and vanish back into the earth before the dust settled. There were no front lines, only 1,000 bleeding wounds inflicted on the empire's flank. The scale of this disaster is best illustrated by a chilling silence in the historical record regarding the Legio 22nd Deotariana. This veteran unit based in Egypt marched into Judea and effectively vanished from history. While no ancient text explicitly details its final moments, historians hypothesize that this entire legion, over 5,000 heavy infantry and auxiliaries, was mauled or annihilated in these rocky defiles, their eagles captured, and their names lost to the desert sand. Governor Rufus realized too late that this was not a localized riot. It was a highly organized, religiously fueled national uprising. Rome was bleeding, and the governor was helpless. Hadrian realized this was not a police action. It was a full-scale war, and he knew exactly who to call to finish it. The emperor's response was cold, calculated, and overwhelming. He did not send another politician. He sent his finest executioner. Sextus Julius Severus was recalled from the mist-shrouded frontier of Britannia, arguably the most difficult command in the empire, and dispatched to the burning hills of Judea. Along with Severus came the full weight of the Roman military machine. The roads began to tremble under the rhythmic, terrifying thud of hobnailed boots striking the stone in unison. Legions arrived from every corner of the Mediterranean, including the Legio X Fretensis, Legio Six Ferrata, and elements of the Legio Thurge Cyrenaica. Historians estimate that Hadrian ultimately committed over 60,000 legionaries and auxiliaries to this campaign, though a force nearly equal to the one Julius Caesar used to conquer all of Gaul. Upon arrival, Severus immediately recognized the tactical trap that had humiliated his predecessors. He understood that chasing elusive guerrilla fighters through ravines was a waste of Roman blood. He refused the invitation to open battle. Instead, he treated the entire province not as a battlefield, but as a pestilence to be starved out. He broke his massive army into smaller mobile combat groups designed to hunt rather than conquer. The order was given: avoid large-scale engagements, cut the supply lines, and burn the olive groves. It was a strategy of ruthless patience, turning the very land against its defenders. In the arid highlands of Judea, water is the only currency that matters. The rebellion relied on a complex network of hidden cisterns and natural springs to sustain the fighters hiding in the limestone caves. Severus weaponized this geography. Roman engineers mapped the wadis and blocked the springs, while patrols were stationed to guard the few remaining water sources. Thirst became a more effective weapon than the sword. Simultaneously, the legions torched the olive groves and trampled the vineyards. These were not just food sources. They were the economic heart of the region. Trees that had taken decades to grow destroyed in minutes. The air over the province turned heavy and gray, carrying the acrid, inescapable smell of burning wood and rotting crops. The underground tunnel networks, once the rebels' greatest advantage, transformed into horrific traps. While Roman centurions learned to identify the ventilation shafts hidden amidst the scrub. Rather than sending men down into the dark to face ambushes, they simply piled green wood and sulfur at the entrances and lit fires. The physics of the cave systems worked against the defenders. The drafts sucked the thick poisonous smoke deep into the subterranean chambers. Inside, the sound of coughing and choking replaced prayers. Rebels were forced to make an impossible choice: crawl out to be enslaved and executed by the waiting legionaries, or remain in the dark and suffocate. As the perimeter tightened, the psychological strain within the rebel leadership reached a breaking point. The unity that had defined the early months of the uprising began to fracture under the weight of starvation and suspicion. Surviving letters from this period reveal a darkening in Simon Bar Kokhba's own mind. He no longer sounded like a messianic liberator, but like a desperate, paranoid warlord. In one missive found by archaeologists, he threatens the commanders of Ain Gedi with brutal punishment, accusing his own followers of hoarding food while the front lines starved. The King Messiah was watching his kingdom turn to ash, and he turned his wrath inward. By the summer of 135 CE, the dream of a free Judea had shrunk to the size of a single hilltop fortress, Betar. Inside these walls, Simon Bar Kokhba and his remaining followers were not fighting for victory, but for time. Outside, Julius Severus constructed a continuous ring of stone and timber that completely sealed the fortress off from the outside world. Inside Betar, the cisterns ran dry, and the prayers for rain went unanswered. The charismatic leader, once hailed by Rabbi Akiva, now commanded an army of gaunt figures. Tension reportedly snapped within the command tent. Rabbinic sources suggest Bar Kokhba, consumed by paranoia, may have executed his own uncle, Rabbi Eleazar, suspecting betrayal. Then came the sound that signifies the end of hope, the rhythmic deafening crack of iron against wood. The Roman battering rams had reached the gates. For days, the pounding echoed through the starving city, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to destruction. When the timber finally splintered and gave way with a sickening crunch, the legions did not storm in as a chaotic mob, but as a disciplined machine of slaughter. The final moments of Bar Kokhba remain shrouded in the fog of war. Some accounts claim he died in combat, and others suggest he was found dead with a snake wrapped around his neck. What is historically certain is that his head was severed and presented to the Roman command. With his death, the resistance evaporated. The war did not end with a cheer, but with a suffocating silence. The Judean hills were now gray graveyards of ash and stone. The Roman victory was absolute, yet it was not celebrated with the usual pomp. When Emperor Hadrian finally sat down to write his official report to the Senate, he hesitated. By ancient tradition, a victorious emperor began with the standard formula: "If you and your children are well, it is well. I and the legions are well." But Hadrian did not write those words. The legions were not well. The thousands of Roman dead buried in the rocky soil were the cost of crushing a single province. However, if Rome bled, Judea was obliterated. The historian Cassius Dio recorded the cold arithmetic of the slaughter. He wrote that 580,000 men were slain in skirmishes and battles, while famine and disease claimed countless others. The infrastructure of the nation was systematically dismantled. 50 fortified towns were leveled, and 985 villages were razed to the ground. The smell of death hung so heavy over the province that physicians in neighboring Syria warned travelers against entering the region. For the survivors, fate was arguably worse. Tens of thousands of captives were marched in chains to the slave market at Hebron. The supply of human bodies was so overwhelming that the economy of flesh collapsed. A Jewish slave was sold for no more than the price of a horse's daily ration of barley. Hadrian's final act of war was not fought with a gladius, nay, but with a map. In his eyes, the Jewish people had proven too stubborn to be allowed a homeland. To ensure they would never rise again, he attempted to erase the very name of Judea from history. In official Roman records, the province was renamed Syria Palestina, a deliberate stinging reference to the ancient biblical enemies of the Jews. The message was brutal and clear. This land no longer belonged to the children of Israel. On the ruins of Jerusalem, the pagan city of Aelia Capitolina rose in cold marble, and Jews were banned from entering under penalty of death. Yet, in this total devastation lies a historical paradox. The Bar Kokhba Revolt destroyed the Jewish state, but it crystallized the Jewish spirit. With the temple gone and the priesthood shattered, the center of Jewish life shifted to the academies. The religion transformed from one of blood sacrifice and political borders into one of books, laws, and prayer. The generals were dead, so the rabbis took the lead, building a portable homeland that ensured their identity survived the Roman conquest. This war forces us to ask a terrifying question: is the price of absolute freedom worth the risk of total annihilation? Or is survival in submission better than death in glory? The rebels of 132 ECE chose the sword, and they paid a price that echoed for nearly 2,000 years. If you want to join us as we uncover more of history's most tragic and heroic chapters, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to never miss a story from the past.